It is the morning of the 27th of June, 2007, on one of the most expensive streets in London, Carlton House Terrace. White stone, black railings, a quiet row of grand houses that look out over the green of St. James's Park and the long, straight road that runs down to the palace. Ambassadors live here. Old money lives here. Nothing happens here. And in the small garden 5 floors below one of those balconies, a man is lying on his back in the flower bed, not moving. His slippers gone from his feet, the morning paper still folded upstairs, the kettle in his kitchen still warm. He has fallen, or he has jumped, or he has been thrown. He is 63 years old. He is one of the richest men in the city. He is the son-in-law of a dead president and the right hand of the man who came after. For more than 30 years, 2 governments have argued in secret over a single question about him. Was he the bravest traitor of the century or the greatest liar? And which side did he really betray? 2 workmen on the terrace above say they saw figures on the balcony in the seconds before he came down. By the time anyone reaches the garden, the balcony is empty. And the pages he had been writing, the memoir that was going to name names, the book that frightened people in 2 capitals, are gone from the flat before the police arrive. One of the most important spies who ever lived just hit the pavement in front of the Queen's Park. And nobody can tell you who did it. You're listening to the Betrayal Files. The folder is heavy, and half of it contradicts the other half. Case file number 5, declassified in fragments through a British inquest, through the memoirs of an Israeli spy master, through a feud between 2 old intelligence chiefs that played out in the Israeli courts, through documents Egypt has never opened at all. The most important parts are still sealed in Tel Aviv and in Cairo, and both cities have good reasons to keep them shut. The countries are Egypt and Israel, and the years are the 1970s, the years of the last great Arab-Israeli war, when a single source inside the enemy's palace could decide whether a nation lived or died. The agencies are the Mossad and Egyptian intelligence, and the terrible thing about this case is that we still do not know for certain which of them owned this man. The name on the folder is Ashraf Marwan. The Israelis who ran him never used it. To them, he was a code word, the angel. Later, Babylon. The most valuable agent they ever recruited in the Arab world, and possibly the most expensive mistake they ever made. He was born in 1944 in Egypt, into exactly the right family. His father was a senior officer in the Presidential Guard, a man close to power, trusted by the state, part of the machinery that protected the men at the top. Ashraf grew up inside that world of uniforms and proximity and quiet ambition, and he wanted more of it than his father ever had. He was clever, and he was charming, and he was impatient. He studied chemistry at Cairo University, a serious subject for a serious young man, and he carried himself like someone who already belonged in rooms he had not yet entered. People who knew him young said the same thing people would say about him for the rest of his life, that he was magnetic, that he made you want to trust him, that you could never quite see the bottom of him. He came of age in an Egypt that was about to be humiliated. This was the country of Nasser at his height, the leader who had nationalized the Suez Canal, who spoke for the whole Arab world, who promised that the next war with Israel would erase the shame of the last. And then came June of 1967, the Six-Day War, and in less than a week, the Egyptian Air Force was destroyed on the ground, and the army was thrown back across the desert, and the dream collapsed in front of the entire region. Ashraf Marwan watched the most powerful man in the Arab world brought low. He learned early that the men at the top were not as strong as they looked, and that the right secret at the right moment was worth more than any army. In 1966, he crossed the line that would define everything. He married Mona Abdel Nasser, the third daughter of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, the towering hero of the Arab world, the most powerful man in the Middle East. Overnight, a chemistry graduate became a member of the first family of the Arab nation. But the president did not want him. This is the wound at the center of the whole story, and you have to feel it to understand what came after. Nasser, by most accounts, distrusted his new son-in-law. He thought Ashraf was a social climber. He thought the marriage was about access, not love. He kept him at arm's length, watched him, blocked him, and made it clear in 100 small ways that the young man with the famous wife would never be one of the inner circle. So Ashraf Marwan, married into the most powerful house in Egypt, found himself humiliated by it. They sent him to London, supposedly to continue his studies in chemistry. It looked like an opportunity. It was closer to an exile. And it was in London, around 1969, nursing that humiliation, with a famous name and empty pockets and a grudge against the most powerful man in the Arab world, that he picked up a telephone and called the Israeli embassy. No one made him do it. There was no blackmail, no honey trap, no slow seduction by a foreign service. The most damaging spy in the modern history of the Middle East volunteered. He simply called the enemy and offered to sell. The Israelis could not believe their luck, and that disbelief never entirely went away. A walk-in is every intelligence service's dream and every intelligence service's nightmare. Because the one thing you can never be sure of is whether the man walked in on his own or was sent. They took the risk. They had to. The access was simply too enormous to refuse. They gave him code names so that even inside the Mossad, almost no one would know who he was. The Angel. Later, Babylon. They handled him with extreme care, the way you handle something that could make your career or end your country. They met him in safe flats in Europe, in London, in Paris, in Rome. Quiet rooms, careful schedules. A man flying in as a businessman and flying out again with a briefcase that was worth more than any weapon Israel owned. He took risks that should frighten anyone who has ever kept a secret. He carried documents out of the most secret offices in Egypt. He traveled to meet the enemy while holding one of the highest trust positions in his own government. And at the highest moments, he dealt not with a junior officer, but with the chief of the Mossad in person. A level of contact almost unheard of, reserved for a source too precious to risk on anyone else. Through the early 70s, while Sadat told the world that each passing year would be the year of decision, the year Egypt finally went to war, the angel sat inside that promise and reported on whether it was real. Year after year, the war was promised and did not come. Year after year, the angel watched and warned and was believed a little less each time the sky stayed quiet. And then the ground shifted in his favor in a way no one could have planned. In 1970, Gamal Abdel Nasser died. The man who had blocked Ashraf Marwan, who had kept him out in the cold, who had sent him to London, gone. And the man who replaced him, Anwar Sadat, did the opposite of his predecessor. He pulled Marwan close. Sadat made him an aide, then a trusted aide, then one of the most trusted men in the entire Egyptian state, a secretary to the president, handling information and the most sensitive missions, a fixer who flew to Libya to deal with Gaddafi, who handled the arms relationship, who sat in on the secret conversations of a nation preparing for war. Sit with what that means. The man selling Egypt's secrets to Israel was now sitting at the right hand of the president of Egypt, holding the door for the war plans as they walked past. And what he carried out of that palace is almost beyond belief. He gave the Israelis the Egyptian order of battle, the full deployment of the army. He gave them the minutes of the Egyptian High Command. He gave them the details of Egypt's weapons deals with the Soviet Union, the exact systems, the numbers. He gave them accounts of Sadat's private talks with other Arab leaders. By some accounts, he handed over the minutes of secret summit meetings in Moscow between Sadat and the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev. He photographed documents in the president's own circle and passed them to the enemy. For years. And the men around him, proud, careful, suspicious men running a country toward war, saw nothing. And it was not only paper. He gave Israel the shape of the coming war itself, the Soviet weapons flowing into Egypt and the way they would be used, the new surface-to-air missiles that would turn the sky over the canal into a trap for Israeli jets, the new anti-tank missiles that a foot soldier could carry and fire that would burn Israeli armor in the open desert, the plan to cross the Suez Canal and break the sand wall on the far side. The angel handed over the enemy's whole design, and still, when the design was thrown at Israel in October, the country was nearly overwhelmed, which tells you either how powerful that warning was, or how little Israel was allowed to truly believe it. They paid him for it, and they paid enormously. Over the years, the sums reportedly ran into the millions. He became, on the side, a businessman of growing wealth, a man with apartments and companies and the beginnings of the fortune that would one day put him in a house overlooking the Queen's Park. The angel was not cheap. The angel was the most expensive agent the Mossad had ever carried, and, they believed, worth every dollar. They built a system for the worst day. The two of them agreed on a single alarm, a prearranged code word the angel would use only when war was truly coming. By several accounts, it was a word about chemicals, a quiet nod to the chemistry he had once studied, a phrase that meant nothing to anyone listening and everything to the men who waited for it. When that word came down the line, it meant, stop everything. The war is here. And in the spring of 1973, the word came, and it was wrong. In April and May of that year, the angel warned that Egypt was about to attack. Israel believed him. It had to. He was the best source it had. The army carried out a vast, expensive, exhausting mobilization. Reserves called up. Units rushed to the borders. The whole machine spun up for war. It was given a name, that alert, and then nothing happened. No war came. The men went home. The cost ran into the tens of millions, and the embarrassment ran deeper than the money. That false alarm would help kill thousands. Because the next time the angel cried that war was coming, in October, the doubters in Israeli intelligence remembered the spring, and the cost, and the silence that had followed, and they were slow to believe. Whether the angel cried wolf in the spring by mistake or by design is one more thing this file cannot answer. But from the very beginning, there was a crack in the faith, and it ran straight through Israeli intelligence itself. Two camps, one around the head of the Mossad, Zvi Zamir, believed the angel was genuine, a real traitor, a real gift, the best source they had ever had. The other, around the head of military intelligence, Eli Zera, grew more and more uneasy. Why would a man so close to Sadat betray him for money he barely needed? Why did some of his warnings come true and others not? What if the angel was not a gift at all, but a hook with a very long line running back to Cairo? That argument would not be settled in 1973. It has not been settled today. Because in the autumn of 1973, the angel made the most famous phone call in the history of Israeli intelligence. By the start of October 1973, Israel was calm, too calm. Its military intelligence had a theory, they called it the concept, that Egypt would not go to war until it could strike deep into Israel from the air, and that day was years away. Troop movements on the Egyptian side were dismissed as an exercise. The country was about to shut down completely for Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year, when the whole nation stops. And then the angel signaled. On the night of the 5th of October, the source sent the agreed alarm. He wanted an urgent meeting in London with the head of the Mossad himself, not a handler, the chief. Zvi Zamir dropped everything and flew to London in secret to sit across a table from the most important agent his service owned. In the small hours of the 6th of October, the angel told him, war, Egypt and Syria, both fronts at once. He put it, by Zamir's account, at 99%. It was coming, and it was coming now. That warning, racing back to Tel Aviv before dawn, is the reason Israel mobilized at all. It is the reason the reserves were called, the reason the country was not completely asleep when the storm hit. Thousands of Israelis are alive today, the story goes, because the angel made that call. But here is the splinter that has never come out. He told Zamir the attack would begin at sunset on the 6th of October. It began at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, hours early, and in those hours, the hours Israel thought it still had, soldiers were caught half ready, lines were thin, the Egyptians and Syrians punched across the ceasefire lines and into the worst days the Israeli army had known since its birth. The warning was real, the time was wrong. And the question that has haunted this case for 50 years is whether the angel got the time wrong or gave the wrong time on purpose. Because if the wrong time was deliberate, if Cairo sent its man to deliver a warning so close to the attack that it was useless, and a time so wrong that it deepened the surprise, then the angel was not Israel's greatest spy at all. He was the central piece of the greatest deception operation the Arab world ever ran. One former senior Israeli intelligence officer would say, years later, exactly that Marwan had been planted deep inside Israeli intelligence, that he manipulated the head of the Mossad, that he was, in his words, the central cog of Egypt's deception. Others, including the most recent chiefs of the Mossad, have flatly denied it and insist the angel was real and checked again. Both sides are certain. Both sides cannot be right. What is not in doubt is how it ended for the man in the middle. Because in this case, there was no dramatic arrest, no interrogation cell, no public trial. The collapse was slower and stranger than that. The collapse was that his own side could not stop talking. Through the late 1990s and into the new century, the old Israeli feud over the angel curdled into something poisonous. Eli Zera, the military intelligence chief who had been blamed for the surprise of 1973, wanted to clear his name, and to do it, he needed to argue that the famous source had been a double agent, a plant, not a hero. In making that case, in private rooms and then in less private ones, the identity of the angel began to leak. And then, in 2002, an Israeli academic and journalist who had been chasing the story published it. He named Ashraf Marwan, by family, by description, in a way that anyone who wanted to could decode. The most carefully guarded secret of the 1973 war, the real name behind the angel, was suddenly out in the open in books and newspapers. In Israel, it became a scandal that went all the way to the courts. The fight between the two old chiefs, Zamir, who said the angel was real, and Zaira, who said he was a plant, finally had to be judged by someone. A retired Israeli Supreme Court justice was brought in to arbitrate, and he concluded that it was Eli Zaira who had exposed the source's identity to journalists. The man whose doubts about the angel had festered for 30 years was found to have helped strip away the one thing that kept the angel alive, his secrecy. A spy can survive almost anything except being named by his own side. Marwan, in London, denied everything. He called the claim a stupid detective story. He gave interviews. He was by then an immensely wealthy man, a fixture of London society, a player in international business and arms and finance, a friend of the powerful in several countries. And he was, people close to him said, frightened. Because once both sides knew what he was, both sides had reason to want him quiet. To Egypt, if he had been a loyal double agent all along, he was a national asset whose secrets must never be confirmed. To Egypt, if he had been a real traitor, he was the man who sold the war. To Israel, he was a source whose truth or falsehood could rewrite the most painful chapter of its history. Whoever he had really worked for, his memoirs, the book he was now writing, the one that promised to settle it all, were a danger to someone. On the 27th of June, 2007, he went over the balcony of his fifth-floor flat on Carlton House Terrace and died on the stones below. The London police investigated for 3 years. There were the two workmen who said they had seen people on the balcony moments before. There was the strange detail of the slippers found neatly on the balcony, not on his feet. There was the medical history his family pointed to, and the absence of any note. And there was the matter of the memoirs, the pages he had been working on, which his family said vanished from the flat and have never surfaced since. His widow, Mona, the daughter of a president, who had stood by this impossible man for 40 years, told the inquest that her husband had never once spoken of taking his own life, but that he had told her more than once that he was afraid he would be killed. In 2010, the coroner gave his verdict: not suicide, not unlawful killing, an open verdict. His words to the court were plain: "We simply don't know the facts, despite careful investigation." An open verdict after everything. The most connected spy of his generation, and the law of England could not say whether he fell, jumped, or was thrown. Egypt buried him as a hero. His coffin was carried with honors. Senior figures of the state attended. The president of Egypt at the time praised him and said that Ashraf Marwan had carried out patriotic acts for his country. Acts, he added, that it was not yet time to reveal. To a great many Egyptians, that settled it. He had never been a traitor at all. He had been their man inside the Israelis the whole time, and the proof was simply still locked away. In Israel, the reaction was the opposite and just as certain. To one camp, he was the angel who saved the nation, a hero who should be honored, a man Israel had failed to protect once his name got out. To the other, he was the instrument of the catastrophe of 1973, the deception that cost a generation of young soldiers their lives. The old spy master Zvi Zamir defended his source to the end of his days. The men who blamed Marwan defended their version just as fiercely. Israel never stopped arguing about him, and decades later, it was still trying to have the last word. On the 50th anniversary of the war, the Mossad itself broke its silence. The head of the service stood up in public, defended the angel as a true and vital source, and released a photograph of the man for the world to see at last. It was, in its way, an answer to Egypt's hero's funeral. Each country claiming the same dead man, each insisting he had belonged to them. Two intelligence services, half a century on, fighting over a ghost. And so the same man is, at this moment, an honored patriot in one country and a debated traitor in another, and a savior and a deceiver in the third. Reading, and the documents that could prove any of it sit unopened in the vaults of governments that have decided the truth is more dangerous than the silence. By the end, he had built a second life so glittering it almost hid the first. He had left Egyptian government service in the mid-1970s and turned himself into an international businessman, arms, finance, property, moving between London and the capitals of the Gulf, gathering a fortune estimated in the hundreds of millions. He was charming at dinners, generous to causes, welcome in rooms where the powerful met. The poor relation Nasser had despised had become one of the wealthiest Arabs in Europe. And under all of it, in his final years, he was a man checking the faces in the street, a man who told his wife he might be killed, a man writing a book he perhaps should never have started. His wife kept his name. His children grew up as the grandchildren of Gamal Abdel Nasser, and the children of a man history cannot place. The fortune remained, the memoirs did not, and the balcony on Carlton House Terrace looks out to this day over the Green Park and the long road to the palace, as if nothing ever happened there at all. So much of this will never close. These are the questions that outlived him. First, whose man was he really? Israel's spy or Egypt's double agent sent to deceive Israel? 50 years of argument between intelligence professionals who had access to the files have not produced an agreement. If the people who ran him cannot decide, what chance does anyone else have? Second, the wrong time. Did the angel truly believe the attack would come at sunset and simply pass on bad information? Or did he name an hour he knew was false to make a useless warning out of a real one? The difference between those two answers is the difference between a hero and the most successful deceiver of the age. Third, who was on the balcony? Two workmen described figures beside him in his last seconds. The flat was 5 floors up. The slippers were left behind. If someone was there, they have never been found, and no government has ever admitted to looking very hard. Fourth, where are the memoirs? He was writing the book that would answer all of this, and his family says the pages disappeared in the hours around his death. A manuscript that could embarrass 2 intelligence services, gone, lost, or taken, and if taken, by whom? Fifth, and this one is not a question, because both Cairo and Tel Aviv have answered it the same way for half a century, with locked doors. They each hold files that could end the argument tomorrow. Neither will open them. When 2 old enemies agree, completely, that the world must not know what one man did, that agreement is its own kind of confession. Close the folder. A chemistry student who married a president's daughter and was despised for it. A man who picked up a telephone in London and sold his country, or pretended to. The most valuable agent 2 intelligence services ever fought over, and they are still fighting, long after he stopped breathing. He gave warnings that saved thousands, and a warning that may have doomed thousands more. And to this day, no one can tell you with certainty which he was. He died on the stones beneath his own balcony, with the answer half written and then stolen. 2 countries call him a hero. Neither will say why. That is not honor. That is a door closed from both sides. Case closed.